My daughter-in-law said, "You don't help us enough. This is your final Christmas in this house. Just accept it." She didn't know what I did last week. Julia hurled the box of ornaments hard enough that the glass inside shattered across the hardwood floor. The sound was sharp, almost surgical, slicing straight into my chest. She pointed at me as if I were a stain she had discovered too late. "You do not help us enough. This is your final Christmas in this house, Rebecca. Just accept it." Kay stood behind her with his arms crossed, expression flat and loyal only to his own convenience. "Mom, Julia is right. You barely contribute. Stop expecting respect you have not earned." I had been spoken to harshly before, but something in their tone that morning carried a certainty that chilled me. It was not frustration. It was dismissal, the kind people reserve for furniture they want to replace. Julia stepped closer, her voice dripping with contempt. "You live here just to leech off us. I am not your nurse." She waved her hand as if brushing away smoke. "Old people should sit still and stay out of the way." Then she wrinkled her nose. "Your medication smell brings the whole house down," Kay added quietly. "Mom, you slow everything down. Even the kids avoid you." That was the cruelest lie, because Evan and Chloe always ran to me whenever Julia was not watching. They loved sitting beside me while I read to them. They felt safe with me, and I with them, but Kay had learned to say whatever Julia needed to hear. Before I go further, let me tell you gently and from my heart, if you feel justice deserves celebration, smash that hype button. Let us keep stories like this alive, echoing far, far away. Your support helps us bring understanding and love to those who truly deserve it. Thank you so much. Keep listening. Julia's hatred of me did not grow out of one moment. It rooted itself in petty things she cultivated into grudges. On her wedding day years ago, I suggested they scale back the expensive venue because Kay was drowning in student loan debt. I said it softly, out of care, but she treated it as public humiliation. Then there was the time I caught her manipulating a tax form. I did not report her, I only told her it could get her in trouble. She claimed I was threatening her. In her mind, everything I did was proof that I never supported their marriage. And when she learned that the house they lived in, my home, was still legally mine, her bitterness sharpened into something more dangerous. I had lived my life being useful. I worked 20 years as a school cafeteria cook, waking at 4 each morning to prepare meals for hundreds of children. I brought leftovers home for Kay so he could have warm food after school. When my husband died, I sold my wedding ring to help pay Kay's tuition. I never complained, I never asked for anything. I thought love was something you earned by giving. But after I fractured my pelvis at 69, my steps became slower. Recovering took time. Julia used that weakness as ammunition. To her, my limp was proof of my worthlessness. Kay, once a tender boy who cried when he lost a toy, had become a man frightened of conflict, frightened of losing the family he built with a woman who wielded manipulation like a blade. Julia had told him plainly, "If you keep your mother here, I will take the kids and go to my mother's house. Choose." Fear ruled him more than affection ever had. I became a liability he could not afford. The worst wound did not come from the insults. It came from how she separated me from the children. She told them I was too fragile to hold them. She whispered lies about me being sick. She said, "She smells like hospitals," and "Old people's sadness is contagious." I heard her once tell Chloe, "Sweetheart, do not hug her too long. She gets confused." She knew exactly where to strike. She used the word grandmother like it was a burden, not a bond. I kept trying to stay useful, folding laundry slowly, preparing simple meals, keeping the house quiet, but every effort became another reason for her to sneer. I saw how Kay avoided looking at me, as if eye contact might make him responsible for the cruelty he permitted. One evening, after another round of muttered accusations about how I took up too much space, I paused in the hallway. Julia's voice came from the living room, sharp and urgent, as she spoke on the phone. "She will not be here much longer. After what happened last week, everything is already in motion." I froze. The tremor in her voice was not anger, it was a calculation. Something had already been set in place, something involving me, something they expected I would never notice. I clutched the doorframe to steady myself as a cold realization crept through my ribs. What, exactly, had happened last week? And why did they think it meant I would not be here much longer? For the first time in a long while, fear did not make me silent. It made me listen. The week after Julia's ominous phone call, small things in the house began to shift, not loudly, not dramatically, but in ways that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand upright. Suspicion never arrives like a siren. It slips in quietly, rearranging the edges of your life until nothing fits quite right anymore. Kay was the first change. He suddenly insisted on being the only one with the mailbox key. "It is easier if I get the mail on my way home," he said, avoiding my eyes. When I reached for the small bundle of envelopes he carried inside each evening, Julia would intercept them with a bright, false smile. "You know, old people forget checking mail," she said. "We are helping you." The way she emphasized helping felt like a warning wrapped in politeness. But I noticed the pattern. Envelopes addressed to me always vanished fastest, particularly the ones from the bank. One afternoon, while putting away towels in the hallway cabinet, a slip of paper caught my eye, a credit card statement in my name, folded in half. I never used credit cards anymore, not after my fall, when hospital bills forced me to simplify everything. Curious, I opened it. A charge for $900 from a jewelry store. My first reaction was confusion, not fear. Maybe it was an error, an accidental charge, or a mix-up. But when I showed it to Julia, she let out a sharp laugh. "Maybe you bought something for yourself and forgot. It happens. Memory goes first, you know." She tapped her temple lightly with a pitying smile that was somehow more painful than anger. And Kay, he did not even look up from his phone. I felt something inside me twist, not just unease, foreboding. Later that week, while putting leftovers in the outside freezer, I heard noises from the garage, metallic scraping, paper rustling, a drill buzzing for a few seconds, then silence, then someone whispering sharply, "Not now. She is coming." I paused, with my hand still on the freezer handle. I recognized Julia's voice instantly. When I turned the corner, the garage door swung shut as if pushed by someone inside. Locked. Again. I stood there for several seconds, listening to my own heartbeat, wondering why my garage, was suddenly off-limits to me. Julia's resentment toward me mutated daily, fed by reasons so irrational they bordered on absurd. I overheard her talking to a friend on speakerphone while she folded laundry. "Every time she walks into a room, the energy dies," she said. "Some people just drain you by existing." Her friend murmured sympathy, as if Julia were living with a ghost instead of a woman who bought groceries, folded clothes, and stayed invisible to avoid confrontation. Gaslighting is not loud. It is slow. It is designed to make you question your place in the world. But the deepest cut came from Kay. One night around 2:30 in the morning, I got up for water. As I walked past his office, I heard his voice through the door, soft, low, tender, in a way he had not spoken to me in years. "I love you," he whispered. "I know, Renee. I know. I will fix everything with the house soon. Just trust me." My breath caught. Renee, a name I had never heard him say. Not Julia, not a co-worker slice of affection, someone he loved, someone he was making promises to. And the words he used, "fix everything with the house," echoed in my mind like a dropped pan. The house was mine. The deed was mine. Why would Kay think he needed to fix anything unless something was already broken or breaking? I backed away from the office quietly and returned to my room, but sleep felt impossible. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, letting puzzle pieces click into place, missing mail, false charges, the undercurrent of secrecy, the sudden hostility, the threats Julia used to manipulate Kay, and now this unnamed woman tied to promises about my home. The next morning, I bent down to retrieve a dropped dish towel near the hallway closet. As I shifted a storage box aside, the lid slipped off and several sheets of paper slid out. They were lined pages, each covered with a looped, wobbly imitation of a signature. My signature. Dozens of attempts. My breath hitched. I knelt, ignoring the pain in my hip, and picked up one sheet. The letters were shaky, uneven, but unmistakably meant to resemble my handwriting. They were practicing forging me. A cold, heavy stillness settled in my stomach. These papers had not fallen by accident. They had been hidden, buried among old extension cords and paint rollers, never meant for me to see. I ran my finger over one of the signatures. It looked wrong, but wrong in a practiced way, someone learning the curves of my name the way a child learns cursive. Why? What were they preparing? What had already been in motion, as Julia said? And worst of all, what had they done last week? I stared at the forged signatures until the ink began to blur, not because of tears, but because the truth behind them was beginning to take shape, a shape far darker than I wanted to believe. I had never been the kind of woman who dug through other people's digital trash, but something inside me, something older than fear and sharper than instinct, pushed me toward Kay's old laptop on the shelf in the hallway closet. He rarely used it now. Everything he did seemed to happen on his phone. But the machine still held traces of him, and I needed answers. The screen lit up with my reflection, pale and too still. After 2 failed guesses, I tried Chloe's name, something sentimental enough that Kay always used it. To my surprise, it worked. My heart sank a little at how easily I stepped into a world I was never meant to enter. I started with deleted emails. The first file stopped me cold. A photo. Kay, smiling widely, holding a little girl with curls and bright eyes who was hugging his leg as if he were her whole world. Beside them stood a woman, Renee, with a soft expression and a hand tucked behind Kay's back like it belonged there. In the upper corner, written in a child's glittery marker font, Daddy Kay and us. My breath thinned into a single tight thread. I stared at the image longer than I should have, long enough for the edges of the screen to blur. My son had another family, a child who called him Daddy, and he had never breathed a word to anyone, not even his children, not even me. I scrolled. More messages. More truth. Did you talk to your wife about selling the house? We need the money. My heart slammed once, then seemed to stop. This was the week before Julia had bragged about. This was the thing already in motion. Kay had promised Renee that he would sell my house, in 2 months. And worse? Another message read, "Transfer went through. Thank you. It covers the school deposit. Transfer. My money, my savings, my security." He had not only promised away my home, he had begun funneling my money to his secret family. At that moment right there, with my eyes burning from betrayal and truth, something in me hardened, not into rage, into purpose. I wiped my eyes, then continued. In another folder was a scanned document, half shredded, clearly torn in anger. I dragged the pieces into place on the screen. Slowly, a picture reformed. It was a real estate contract, listing my house for sale, and on the dotted line where my signature should have been was a shaky, slanted imitation of my name, a forgery. The same loops and crooked strokes I had seen on those practice sheets in the garage. Suddenly, the pieces locked into place in a way that felt nauseatingly clear. The late-night calls, the garage secrecy, the practiced handwriting, the missing mail, the credit card charges, even Julia's sudden confidence about this being my last Christmas in the house. This had never been carelessness or resentment. This was architecture. This was a plan. And they had started it last week. My stomach tightened as I opened one more scan note in the same folder, just a scribbled reminder, almost too casual for the destruction it represented. Doctor appointment for cognitive test needed before POA signing. Power of attorney. They were making a case that I was mentally declining. They were preparing to take legal control of everything I owned. They were going to strip me of competence and then strip me of my home. With a fraudulent signature, ready and waiting, I pressed my hand against my mouth to smother the sound that tried to escape. It was not a sob. It was a sound of realization, raw and involuntary. They had planned to erase me. Quietly, efficiently, legally. For a moment I sat completely still, letting the truth settle like dust on old furniture. Then slowly, very slowly, I stood. I was not strong with the kind of strength youth offers, but I had something they never accounted for. I was awake, and I was listening. I walked to the living room, where the Christmas tree stood half decorated, ornaments still waiting in boxes Julia had thrown earlier in a fit of anger. My hands moved with a steady calm as I reached into my pocket and took out the tiny recorder I had purchased weeks ago, back when suspicion was only a whisper. I slid it inside the hollow ceramic star at the top of the tree. Then I moved to the hallway, lifted a framed photo of Kay and his children, and attached a second recorder behind the backing. A third went beneath the couch cushion Julia favored. A fourth inside the little wicker basket on the kitchen counter where Kay dropped his keys. I stood in the center of the quiet house, surrounded by twinkling lights and unfinished decorations, and felt my pulse steady into something unshakable. They thought they had set the stage. They thought I was the audience. They thought I was fading, confused, and powerless. But I had just become the witness, and soon, very soon, they would learn what happens when the woman they plan to erase decides not to disappear. The house was quiet that night. Quiet in the way danger often is too controlled, too deliberate. Kay and Julia moved around with hushed voices, careful steps, and a rehearsed tension that made the walls feel thinner. I waited upstairs, hands folded in my lap, pretending to read while the recorder inside the Christmas star captured every whisper. It began with the sound of the garage door closing. Then Kay's voice, low and irritated. "We are running out of time. The loan officer said the documents need to look consistent across all accounts." Julia snapped back. "Then practice until they do. You said you could copy her handwriting." Papers shuffled, metal scraped, someone slammed a drawer. Kay exhaled sharply. "I opened 2 more accounts under her name. It spreads out the transfers and keeps the bank from flagging anything. We just need the POA finalized." I froze. 2 more accounts. My identity, sliced apart and repurposed. Julia's heels clicked against the concrete floor. "And the mail? I changed the address 2 weeks ago," she said proudly. "Everything goes to my P.O. box now." She has no idea. My stomach tightened. Every lost envelope, every missing notice. Every time they told me I was confused, all of it had been engineered. Kay groaned. "Do you even know how much longer I have to keep forging her signature? My hand is cramping." More papers rustled, and then his frustrated mutter, "God, this loop in the R is impossible." "Oh, stop whining," Julia said. "Just trace the old forms. The notary barely looks at signatures. All we need is the cognitive test to make her legally impaired. After that, even a scribble will pass." A breath escaped me, shaky and small. They were discussing my mind like it was a piece of defective furniture. But the night was far from finished. There was a new tone in Kay's voice, exhausted but hungry, the sound of a man who thought a new life was waiting for him just across the finish line. "Once the house sells," he said quietly, "Renee and I can start fresh. She and the baby deserve better than hiding in that cramped apartment." My body went cold. And the recorder captured everything. Julia's footsteps stopped abruptly. "What did you just say?" Kay tried to recover. "Julia, don't start." "No," she said, voice rising sharply. "Say it again." "You said you and who will start fresh?" Kay's sigh was the sound of a man caught by his own foolishness. "It is not what you think." "Oh, I think it is exactly what I think," she laughed, but there was nothing human in it. "You have a mistress. And a baby. And you're using this house you do not even own to bankroll your little fantasy?" Kay stepped back. I could hear his shoes scrape. "Julia, please listen." She slapped him. The sound cracked through the garage, picked up perfectly by the recorder in the ornament above their heads. "You idiot," she screamed. "I have been helping you steal from your mother, and all this time, you were planning to leave me too?" Kay snapped. "If you hadn't made everything so miserable, maybe..." Another slap, harder, then chaos. Shouting. Things falling over. Julia calling him names that scorched the air. Kay shouting back with the panic of someone watching his entire scheme slip through his fingers. "You told me this was for us," Julia yelled. "For our kids, for a better life." Kay shouted. "It was, but Renee..." Julia's voice cracked into a pitch I had never heard. "You're throwing everything away for some woman and her child?" Their argument spiraled into a frenzy of betrayal, accusation, and desperation. I sat upstairs, barely breathing, listening as the 2 people who had spent months plotting to erase me now clawed each other apart. Then came the line that sealed everything spoken by Julia, shrill with disbelief and fury. "So for your mistress, you would throw your own mother into a nursing home?" The silence after it was chilling. Kay did not deny it, he did not speak at all. And in that quiet, I felt something inside me shift, not pain, not fear, not even anger. Certainty. I finally had proof, not just of betrayal, but of intent, of cruelty, of strategy. And the night they thought would tighten the trap around me had become the night the entire trap collapsed on them instead. Soon, they would learn what it meant to underestimate a woman who had nothing left to lose and everything left to expose. The family meeting was announced the way tragedies often are, too casually, as if the weight of what was coming could be disguised under a friendly tone. Julia knocked on my door, but did not wait for an answer before opening it. "Downstairs," she said. "Now." Her voice carried no hostility this time, only the cold efficiency of someone carrying out a decision already made. Kay waited at the dining table with a stack of papers. He looked tired, but not remorseful, not conflicted, just resolved. "Mom," he began, clasping his hands like a doctor preparing to deliver a diagnosis. "We need to talk about your living situation." Julia sat beside him, chin high, eyes sharp with something close to triumph. Kay cleared his throat. "You've been declining mentally, forgetting things, confusing dates, making mistakes with simple tasks. It's safer for everyone if you have professional care from now on." I stared at him, stunned not by the lie but by how gently he delivered it, as if that softened the betrayal. Julia leaned forward. "What he means is, you're moving into a nursing home, 1 month from today." Her lips curled into a smile so satisfied it made my skin prickle. "Honestly," she added, "I don't want to see your face in this house for another day. Christmas this year will be the last time you get to make everything miserable here." Kay shot her a warning look, but she didn't care. She had been waiting too long to say these things aloud. I folded my hands in my lap, steadying my breath. "I am not declining mentally," I said softly. Julia laughed, not loudly, mockingly. "Oh, please. You wander the house like a ghost. You forget conversations 5 minutes after we have them. You asked me twice last week where the laundry detergent was." "That was because you hid it," I replied. Her smile froze. Kay cut in quickly. "Mom, this isn't an argument. The evaluation with the cognitive specialist is already scheduled. Once we have official confirmation, the care facility can admit you immediately." I felt something inside me shift again, but this time it wasn't fear. It was clear. They didn't want to remove me because I was declining. They wanted to remove me so they could finish what they had started, sell my home, clean out my accounts, and walk away with a life built on my sacrifice. And they were confident enough to speak these plans to my face because they believed I had no options left. I opened my mouth to respond, but my phone buzzed in my pocket. I reached for it slowly, expecting another appointment reminder or pharmacy message. But the preview on the screen made my heart stop. "Fiona Blake, your living trust is done. They can touch nothing you own anymore." I blinked hard, rereading it, letting the words sink into every corner of me. Nothing they owned, nothing they planned, nothing they forged, not anymore. For a moment, the air in the dining room felt lighter, almost sweet. Julia rolled her eyes. "Is that your doctor again? Should I answer it for you?" "No," I said, sliding the phone back into my pocket. "It wasn't the doctor." Kay sighed as if exhausted by the burden of having a mother. "Mom, we're trying to help you. This is for your own good." For the first time since this ordeal began, I felt no tremor in my hands, no heat behind my eyes, no ache in my chest. Instead, I felt a smile forming, small, controlled, and calm. But it must have unsettled them, because Julia sat up straighter. "Why are you smiling?" I looked between the two of them, the son I had raised and the woman who thought cruelty was a form of power. It was a strange moment, almost peaceful. Like standing at the edge of a storm you know will wash the entire landscape clean. "I'm just thinking," I said gently, "that it's interesting how people can believe they've already won when they haven't even realized the game is over." Julia's face paled, Kay's brows knit in confusion. And for the first time, I did not see them as authority, as threats, as the people who controlled my life. I saw them clearly as two people who had already lost. Christmas morning arrived, dressed in the kind of forced warmth only troubled families can produce. The house smelled of cinnamon and tension. Julia had decorated every corner with an almost manic perfection, as though glitter and garlands could hide the rot festering under the floorboards. Relatives filled the living room, Kay's cousins, Julia's sisters, an aunt who only ever surfaced for free food. The children, Evan and Chloe, buzzed around the tree, unaware that the adults had built their entire month on lies. I moved quietly through the room, my hips stiff but steady, my mind sharper than anyone there imagined. The star at the top of the tree glittered softly innocent, sparkling, and carrying every secret they thought I was too old to understand. Kay tapped a spoon against his glass. "Everyone," he announced, lifting his wine. "I want to make a toast." He looked at Julia, then at me with that polite, condescending expression he had perfected over the last few years. "To fresh beginnings without burdens." A few relatives murmured agreement, assuming he was making some inspirational holiday comment. Only Julia smirked openly at me, her triumph too bloated to hide. I felt the weight of Fiona's message in my pocket. They can touch nothing you own anymore. The trust was sealed. The house was legally protected. The accounts were locked. Everything was ready. Kay waved his glass in a small circle, urging everyone to cheer. "To freedom," he added, eyes lingering on me. Yes, I thought, to freedom indeed. Before he could take a sip, I walked toward the tree. Evan noticed first. "Grandma, where are you going?" His voice was soft, confused. It gave me just enough courage to do what I had waited weeks to do. I reached up, adjusted the shining star, and flicked the tiny switch on its base. A soft click. Then the speakers, hidden in the living room, placed there for holiday music, connected to the recorder inside the ornament. Not music, not carols. My son's voice. Clear, sharp, damning. "Once we get her into the nursing home, the house is ours. Renee and I can finally start fresh." The room froze. A cousin gasped. Julia's wineglass tilted in her hand. Then her own voice, shrill and furious from the night they nearly tore each other apart. "For your mistress you'd throw your own mother into a nursing home?" Kay's face drained of color. "Mom, turn that off." I didn't move. The next recording played automatically, crisp and undeniable. "You changed the mailbox address, right?" "Yes." "She'll never see another bank statement again." "Good. And keep practicing her signature until it's perfect." Julia lunged toward the tree, but two of Kay's cousins stepped in front of her, stunned into protective instinct. Another clip. "We need the POA signed before she realizes anything. Just keep her confused. That's not hard." The murmurs rose around the room. A horrified whisper from someone behind me. My God, they were stealing from her. Evan and Chloe clung to my arms, their small hands trembling. "No," Kay muttered, shaking his head violently. "No, this is taken out of context. This is manipulated." But the recorder did not care. It kept going. Julia's voice, mocking and cruel. "She's old, she's useless, no one will believe her." A loud, collective inhale spread through the room. And then the final blow. Kay, voice cracking with desperation, whispering into the recorder without knowing it was listening. "Renee, I swear I'm selling the house soon. My mom won't be here much longer." Julia screamed. "Enough! Turn it off!" But it was far too late. My living room, once their stage for dominance, was now their courtroom. Relatives backed away from them. Some stared at me with shock, others with pity, others with a dawning respect that felt too new to trust. Chloe lifted her face to mine. "Grandma, did Daddy really want to send you away?" I cupped her cheek gently. "Yes, sweetheart. But you didn't do anything wrong." Before another word could be spoken, the front door burst open. Two police officers and a woman from the Financial Crimes Division stepped inside. "Kay Turner, Julia Turner," the lead officer called out. "You are under arrest for elder fraud, identity theft, and coercion." Chaos erupted. Julia stumbled backward, shaking. "What? No, this is insane. We were just helping her." The officer lifted the recording device. "We heard everything. Miss Blake forwarded the evidence and its verified backup. Kay spun toward Julia. "This is your fault. You told me to do it." Julia shrieked. "Do not you dare blame this on me. You cheated. You planned to leave me for that woman. You wanted your mother's house for your mistress." Kay snarled. "You said you'd take the kids if I didn't get rid of her." "You're a coward," Julia screamed. "A pathetic, lying coward." As officers approached, Kay fumbled for his phone. Renee, answer? Please answer." But the automated voice replied, "This number is no longer in service." Of course it wasn't. Renee had vanished the moment the money stopped flowing. Julia tried to run, but two relatives blocked her path, disgust dripping from their expressions. Kay sank to his knees, hands on his head, as if the weight of every lie he'd ever told finally crushed him. The officer snapped handcuffs around Kay's wrists. "You have the right to remain silent." The financial investigator stepped toward me. "Mrs. Turner, your home is protected by the trust. It cannot be sold, seized, or transferred. The property is now secured." Kay's eyes darted to me, wild and terrified. Mom, please help me." I stared at him, really stared, at the man I had raised, the boy I once carried on my hip, the son who had turned me into a burden so he could play hero in someone else's life. Then I said softly, "Merry Christmas, Kay." His face crumpled. They led him out into the cold December morning, Julia screaming at him the whole way, and for the first time in years, the house felt warm, not because of the lights or the decorations, but because the truth finally had room to breathe. The trial did not come quickly, but justice often prefers to walk instead of run. It arrived in pieces, hearings, statements, evaluations, endless paperwork, but each step carved the truth deeper into the foundation of my son's life. And piece by piece, the world Kay had built on lies finally collapsed. When the sentencing day arrived, I sat quietly in the second row of the courtroom. I wore a simple navy dress, my hands folded neatly in my lap. I did not dress for revenge. I dressed for closure. Kay was escorted inside in an orange jumpsuit, wrists bound, eyes hollow. He had lost weight. His shoulders slumped. The confident man who once lifted a glass to toast fresh beginnings without burdens was gone. His arrogance had drained out of him, replaced by something brittle and frightened. Julia sat across the room, separated by court order, her posture rigid and angry. She glared at him as though every wrong in her life, real or imagined, now belonged to him. The judge reviewed the evidence out loud, each sentence landing heavily in the silent room. Forgery of power of attorney. Fraudulent accounts opened under the victim's name. Financial coercion. Deliberate planning to remove the victim from her home. Emotional manipulation and intentional isolation. When he finished, he looked directly at Kay. "For these crimes, and for the demonstrated pattern of elder abuse and premeditated fraud, the court sentences you to 6 to 10 years in state prison." Julia gasped. Kay's mouth fell open. His knees buckled so visibly that the deputy beside him tightened his grip on Kay's arm. I felt nothing sharp, no thrill, no triumph. Only the slow, steady exhale of someone who has finally set down a weight carried far too long. Julia's sentencing came next. She had not committed the majority of the financial crimes, but she had participated in mail tampering, coercion, and attempted conspiracy. She avoided prison time, but the judge's tone turned even colder. "Mrs. Turner, due to your role in the abuse of Miss Rebecca Turner and the psychological harm done to your children in the environment you cultivated, custody of Evan and Chloe will be awarded to their father's aunt, pending long-term placement review." Julia went still, completely still. Then she erupted. "No! No, you can't take my children. They're all I have." But the courtroom door closed behind the social worker carrying the children's files, and no one looked back at her. It was the first time I truly understood. Some punishments are written on paper. Others begin in the silence that follows. As for Renee, she vanished long before Kay understood she was never his escape. Investigators contacted her during the initial financial inquiry, and within hours she had terminated her lease, emptied her apartment, and disappeared without a forwarding address. No visits, no letters, no testimony. She cut him off completely. The baby in the photo, the little girl who once wrapped her tiny arms around Kay's leg, was not biologically his. That truth surfaced during the investigation. Renee had simply found a man willing to fund her stability. When the money stopped, so did her affection. Kay learned this in a 3-minute conversation with the detective. He cried then, loud and unrestrained, the kind of grief that does not come from love but from humiliation. For the first time, I saw him as a man who had built his entire life on the belief that shortcuts were easier than integrity, and then discovered that shortcuts often lead directly to cliffs. Weeks after the sentencing, I was sitting in my small lake house when my phone rang. A number from the correctional facility blinked on the screen. I hesitated. Then I answered. "Mom?" His voice was thin, scraped raw from nights spent replaying everything he had done. "Mom, I am so sorry." The words fell apart halfway through, dissolving into breathless, choking sobs. "I ruined everything. I ruined my life. I ruined everything you worked for. I ruined us. I don't know why I did it. I don't know how I became this person." He cried harder. "I miss the kids. Julia hates me. Renee never loved me. I lost everything. Mom, please, say something." I closed my eyes. The wind outside brushed against the house like a gentle apology from the world itself. "Kay," I whispered. "I raised you to be kind." He sobbed quietly on the other end of the line. "And what you became was your choice." The silence that followed felt heavier than any sentence a judge could give. He inhaled shakily. "I know. Yes," I said gently. "Now you do." I did not hang up abruptly. I listened until his crying faded into soft, broken breaths. I did not forgive him, not because I lacked compassion, but because forgiveness requires accountability, and he was only just beginning to face what he had done. Before the line disconnected, he said one more thing barely audible. "I wish I had been the son you deserved." I held the phone against my chest long after the call ended. He was right. But I also knew this. Sometimes life must break a person completely before the truth reaches them. And only then, only when the consequences arrive like winter, does the frost finally reveal the shape of everything hidden beneath. I moved into Aunt Rosalind's cabin on the edge of the woods in early spring, when the air still carried the last chill of winter but the earth had already begun to loosen its grip on the cold. Her home was small, warm, and tucked beneath tall pines, with branches that shielded the roof like protective arms. For the first time in decades, I woke up without bracing myself for footsteps, tempers, or accusations waiting behind the first open door. Rosalind welcomed me as though she had been preparing for my arrival for years. Maybe she had. There was a quiet understanding between us, one that required no explanations, no apologies, no pretending. She handed me a mug of tea that first morning and said, "Here, you don't owe anything, you simply live." And so I did. I learned the sounds of the woods, how the wind curved around the porch, how the creek behind the house whispered differently depending on the hour, how peace had a texture I had forgotten existed. I cooked only when I felt like it. I planted small herbs outside the kitchen window. I walked slowly and without fear, knowing no one was judging the pace of my steps. Silence here was not punishment, it was rest. The highlight of my week, without fail, came every Saturday afternoon. Evan and Chloe would burst through the cabin door as though entering a place they had been longing for all week. They always ran straight into my arms, their energy warm and honest, untouched by the cruelty their parents had tried to cultivate around me. "Grandma, look, I drew you something." "Grandma, can we bake muffins today?" "Grandma, we learned a new song at school." Their laughter filled the house so completely that sometimes it felt like the walls pulsed with it. They never avoided me. They never recoiled from me. They never repeated Julia's venomous lies about my smell or sadness. They clung to me with the unfiltered affection of children who had always known the truth. When their social worker asked where they felt safest after everything unfolded, Chloe had answered without hesitation, "With Grandma Rebecca. She loves us without yelling." I will hold that sentence close to my heart for the rest of my days. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the treetops and painted the cabin in soft gold, my phone buzzed. A text from Fiona Blake lit up the screen. "Everything you own is fully protected. No one will ever control your life again. Fiona. I exhaled slowly, the kind of breath that comes only after a long, storm-heavy chapter finally closes. For months, my life had been examined under a microscope, documents, signatures, accounts, testimonies, and now, finally, I stood on the other side of it all, untouched, unbroken, and free. I sent her a simple response. Thank you, Fiona, for giving me back my life. After I put the phone down, I stepped outside onto the wooden porch. The night was quiet, except for a few distant crickets beginning their chorus. The sky above me stretched wide and open, the kind of sky that makes you feel both small and infinite at the same time. I thought about Kay, sitting in a cell miles away. I thought about Julia, fighting for a life she dismantled with her own hands. I thought about all the years I had been told I was useless, slow, burdensome, forgettable. And then I thought of the ending they never expected my ending, not theirs. Here I was, alive, safe, surrounded by people who truly loved me, free in a way I had never been allowed to be inside my own home. Rosalind opened the door behind me and called softly, "Rebecca, tea's ready when you are." "I'll be in soon," I said, smiling into the night. As I stood there, a truth rose inside me, clear, steady, and finally unshakable. All my life, Kay and Julia treated my quietness like a flaw carved into me. They said a woman who did not shout had no weight. They said a mother who stayed gentle could be pushed aside. They said an old woman who kept her thoughts to herself was easy to move, easy to silence, easy to rewrite. But they never understood me. My quiet wasn't surrender. It wasn't confusion dressed as compliance. It wasn't the softness they mistook for weakness. It was the space where I learned to read people without their words. It was where I learned how cruelty disguises itself, how ambition sharpens, how lies grow when no one challenges them. Quiet was where I measured the truth, and when the time came, when the mask finally slipped and their schemes stood naked in the light, my quiet didn't tremble. It roared. It filled the room with every recording, every forged signature, every whisper they thought would die behind closed doors. My silence became the evidence they could never outrun. Do not ever mistake the quiet woman in the corner for someone who is not paying attention. Quiet women survive everything and we remember. So no, my story does not close in that house where they tried to make me disappear. It does not close in the fear they tried to plant like weeds in my mind. It does not close inside the walls where they rehearsed my decline as if wishing it would make it real. My story ends here, where the air moves freely, and no one calls me a burden. Here, with people who speak to me with kindness instead of calculation. Here, where love is given without being negotiated or weaponized. For years they insisted that a woman like me had no power unless she raised her voice. But here is what I know now, what I hold the way some people hold prayer. They misunderstood silence. Silence is not the absence of strength. It is where strength gathers and waits. And when the moment finally arrives, silence is the one thing that cannot be stopped. Thank you, truly, for staying with me through this journey. Stories like mine are not just about pain, they are about rising, reclaiming, and returning to yourself after everyone else has tried to define who you are. If this story touched you, if you felt the weight of betrayal, the relief of justice, or the quiet strength of a woman who refused to disappear, then I invite you to stay with us. Subscribe to Grandma True Stories so you never miss another tale of courage, of hidden truths, of women who fought their way back to dignity even when the world counted them out. Your support keeps these stories alive, stories that remind us that silence can be powerful, that kindness is not weakness, and that no one is ever too old to rise again. Thank you for listening, sweetheart. And until the next story, take care of your heart and take care of those who treat it gently.